In the year 1859, in the land of the rising sun, a terrible event took place. The palace of Allah-Ra was never quiet. It pulsed with life, the hum of advisors debating under the ancient baobab tree, the laughter of children weaving through the stone corridors, and the rhythmic beats of drums signaling council meetings. Yet tonight, silence hung heavy like an unspoken curse. The death of Obinna, the kingdom's lion, had extinguished its fire. Ada stood before her father's lifeless body, her heart an unsteady rhythm of grief and fury. The flickering torches cast restless shadows on his weathered face. He had been hale and strong just days ago, rallying the council to prepare for the season's trade caravans. Now, his lips, once quick to smile, were frozen in a grimace. The whispers had already begun. Poison. They killed him. The words left Adeora's lips like an accusation to the universe. In the dimly lit chamber, the body of her father, Obinna, lay still. His strong hands, once capable of steadying an entire kingdom, now rested lifeless on his chest. Once quick to utter words of wisdom, his lips were an unnatural blue. It wasn't a sickness. It wasn't old age. Someone had done this. Adeora's breath hitched as she fought to keep her composure. This wasn't the time for tears. She could feel the walls of the palace closing in on her, the air thick with betrayal. Her father had been her everything, a leader, a mentor, and the only person in the council who believed in her. Now he was gone, and with him, the fragile stability of Allah-Ra. The flickering torches cast restless shadows across the room, illuminating the faces of the council elders as they shuffled around her father's body. They whispered in hushed tones, their words barely audible but their intentions clear. The throne was empty, and vultures were already circling. Poison, one elder muttered, shaking his head. This is a dark day for Allah-Ra. A dark day, indeed, another replied, his voice tinged with something Adeora couldn't quite place. Was it grief? Or ambition? Her gaze shifted to Ikem, the war chief who had served her father for years. He stood apart from the others, his face a mask of stone. His eyes met hers briefly, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Was he grieving, or was he calculating his next move? Adeora clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had no proof, no solid evidence of who had orchestrated this treachery, but she didn't need it. She knew the truth in her gut. Her father's death was no accident, and whoever was behind it wasn't done. The kingdom was vulnerable now, and she was the only one who could see it. But who would listen to her? The elders viewed her as a child, despite her years of learning under her father's watchful eye. She had sat in on council meetings, memorized the kingdom's laws, and even trained in combat alongside her brothers. Yet, in their eyes, she was just a daughter, a woman. And a woman had no place on the throne. The thought ignited a fire within her. They would not take this from her. Not the throne, not her father's legacy, and not her kingdom. She would be ready if the elders wanted to fight over the crown. But first, she needed allies. Adeora's blood ran cold. She opened her mouth to ask another question, but Ugochi raised a hand, silencing her. You already know what you must do, the seer said. The throne is yours, but you must take it. No one will give it to you. As Adeora left the hut, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The seer's words echoed in her ears. The throne is yours, but you must take it. The path ahead was clear, but it was also dangerous. Her father's death had left a void, and if she didn't act quickly, someone else would fill it. Adeora looked up at the night sky, the stars shining brightly above her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The fight for the throne had begun, and she would not lose. The sun rose over Allah-Ra, casting a golden light on the kingdom that seemed to mock the darkness brewing within. The council chamber, a grand circular hall adorned with carvings of the kingdom's history, was filled with tension. The elders sat in their appointed seats, their faces grim as they prepared to discuss the throne's future. Adorora entered silently, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her. She had chosen a simple, flowing red dress and a single string of coral beads around her neck, symbols of royalty, though not yet her own. Her presence was like a ripple in still water, drawing all eyes to her as she took a seat at the edge of the room. The eldest councilman, Obinwachukwu, stood to speak. His voice carried the weight of decades, his words measured and deliberate. "The passing of Obinna leaves a void in our kingdom," he began. "It is our sacred duty to choose a leader who will guide Allah Ra through this time of uncertainty." There were murmurs of agreement, but Adorora could sense the undercurrent of unease. This wasn't just about the throne, it was about power, alliances, and control. She waited, her hands resting calmly on her lap, though her mind raced. Ikem was the first to rise. The war chief, tall and imposing, wore his ceremonial armor as if preparing for battle. "I served Obinna with loyalty and honor," he said, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. "And I will serve this kingdom with the same devotion. I offer myself as a candidate for the throne." The murmurs grew louder, some in agreement, others in protest. Adorora watched him carefully. Ikem was a strong leader, but his ambition was dangerous. He spoke of loyalty, yet she couldn't forget the way his eyes had lingered on her in the palace after her father's death. Was he a friend, or a wolf in sheep's clothing? Another elder rose to speak, this one a staunch traditionalist. "The throne belongs to a man," he said firmly. "Our ancestors have never seen fit to place a woman in such a position. To do so would be to invite chaos." Adeora's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had anticipated this argument, and it only fueled her resolve. When the murmurs subsided, she stood, drawing the room's attention. "I wish to speak," she announced. Her voice was steady, cutting through the noise like a blade. The elders turned to her, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled disdain. "Obinna was my father," she began, "and he prepared me for this moment. He taught me the laws of our land, the ways of leadership, and the importance of justice. I may be his daughter, but I am also his heir." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the chamber. One elder scoffed loudly. "A woman? Do you expect us to hand you the throne simply because of your father's blood?" Adorora stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "I expect nothing to be handed to me," she said. "But I will not stand by and watch this kingdom be torn apart by those who see it only as a prize to be won. My father's death was no accident. Someone in this room knows the truth, and until justice is served, this council has no right to decide the future of Allah Ra." The chamber fell into stunned silence. Adeora's words hung in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to refute her. Ikem was the first to respond. "You speak boldly, Adorora," he said, his tone measured but laced with condescension. "But bold words do not make a leader. This kingdom needs strength, not sentiment. And what strength have you shown?" Adorora shot back. "Have you uncovered the truth behind my father's death? Or are you content to use this tragedy as a stepping stone to power?" Ikem's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The tension in the room was palpable, the elders shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Adorora knew she was walking a fine line, but she couldn't stop now. "I propose a trial," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "Let the people of Allah Ra decide. Let us prove our worth, not with words, but with actions. If I cannot lead, I will step aside. But if I succeed, the throne is mine." The room erupted in chaos, voices shouting over one another. Some elders supported her proposal, while others dismissed it as a desperate ploy. Obinwachukwu raised his hand, calling for silence. "This is unprecedented," he said gravely. "But so is our current situation. Let us consider her words carefully." The council adjourned, leaving the chamber in disarray. Adorora lingered for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. She had thrown down the gauntlet, but she knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger. The trial she proposed would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As she left the chamber, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found herself face to face with Enkay. "You're bold, I'll give you that," he said, his tone unreadable. "But boldness won't protect you. Be careful, dhar. The throne has a way of consuming those who seek it." She met his gaze unflinchingly, then let it try. The trial had been set. dhar stood in the center of the marketplace as the town crier announced the council's decision. She would face a series of challenges, tests of wisdom, strength, and leadership, to prove her worth to the people of dhar. If she succeeded, the throne would be hers. If she failed, she would lose everything. The marketplace buzzed with activity as villagers gathered to watch the spectacle. Some were curious, others doubtful. Whispers followed dhar as she walked through the crowd, her head held high despite the weight of their scrutiny. "She's brave, I'll give her that," one woman murmured. "But can a woman truly lead?" another replied, shaking her head. dhar ignored them. She had no time for doubt, especially not her own. Her first trial would begin at dawn, and she needed to prepare. But as she returned to the palace, a figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking her path. It was enkay, the trader known for his cunning and ambition. His smile was as sharp as the knives he sold in the market. "Lady dhar," he said, bowing slightly. "A word, if I may." She regarded him warily. "Speak." "I admire your determination," he said smoothly. "You remind me of your father, strong, resolute, and unyielding. dhar could use a leader like you." dhara's eyes narrowed. "If that's what you believe, then why didn't you speak in my favor during the council meeting?" enkay chuckled. "The council is a delicate game, my lady. One must tread carefully to avoid making enemies. But I'm not here to talk politics. I've come to offer my help." "And what would you gain in return?" dhar asked, crossing her arms. "Nothing more than your goodwill," he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Consider it a gesture of friendship." dhar studied him for a moment. She didn't trust him, but she also knew she couldn't afford to dismiss potential allies. "I'll think about it," she said curtly before walking away. As she entered the palace, her thoughts were interrupted by the sight of Ugochi, the seer, waiting for her in the corridor. The old woman's expression was unreadable, but her presence was unsettling. "You walk a dangerous path, child," Ugochi said, her voice low. "The trader is a serpent, and his venom will poison your cause." "I don't need riddles right now," dhar replied, her patience wearing thin. "I need solutions." "The answers you seek are already within you," Ugochi said cryptically. "But be warned, not all battles are fought with swords. Some require the sharpness of the mind and the strength of the heart." Before dhar could respond, the seer turned and walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers. The first trial took place in the forest outside the city. It was a test of physical endurance and combat skills, designed to weed out the weak. dhar was pitted against 3 warriors chosen by the council, each one a formidable opponent. The crowd gathered to watch, their voices a mix of excitement and skepticism. dhar stepped into the clearing, her father's sword gleaming in the sunlight. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her, but she refused to falter. Her first opponent was Obinna, a burly man with arms like tree trunks. He charged at her with a roar, his spear aimed at her chest. dhar sidestepped the attack, her movements quick and precise. She struck his spear with her sword, knocking it from his hands before delivering a decisive blow to his shoulder. The crowd erupted in cheers, but dhar barely heard them. She turned to face her next opponent, a lithe woman named Ifema. Unlike Obinna, Ifema relied on speed and agility, darting around dhar like a shadow. It was a battle of endurance, but Adeora's determination won out. She disarmed Ephema with a well-timed strike, leaving her breathless on the ground. The final opponent was Chijioke, a seasoned warrior known for his cunning. He didn't rush into battle like the others but circled her slowly, studying her every move. Adeora's heart pounded as she matched his movements, waiting for an opening. When he finally attacked, she parried his blow and countered with a swift kick to his knee. He stumbled, and she pressed her advantage, forcing him to yield. The trial was over. Adeora stood victorious, her chest heaving as the crowd roared their approval. But as she left the clearing, her triumph was overshadowed by a sense of unease. This was only the beginning. Back at the palace, the council convened to discuss the results of the first trial. Some elders praised Adeora's performance, while others remained skeptical. "She's proven her strength," one elder admitted grudgingly. "But strength alone does not make a leader. We must wait to see how she fares in the next trials," another added. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the palace, Nkemdelim met with Ikem. The two men spoke in hushed tones, their expressions grim. "She's stronger than I anticipated," Ikem said, his jaw clenched. "If she continues like this, the people will rally behind her." Nkemdelim smirked. "Strength can be a double-edged sword. Let her win the next trial. It will only make her downfall more dramatic." "And how do you plan to ensure that downfall?" Ikem asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "Leave that to me," Nkemdelim replied. "By the time the third trial begins, she'll be too distracted to see the knife coming." The morning of the second trial dawned with a golden hue that seemed at odds with the tension brewing in Al-Ahrar. The marketplace was unusually quiet, its usual chatter replaced by the hum of anticipation. Today's trial was one of wisdom, a test of knowledge, diplomacy, and leadership that would prove whether Adeora had the intellect to guide a kingdom. The trial was held in the central courtyard of the palace. A large wooden table had been set, adorned with scrolls, maps, and symbols of Al-Ahrar's history. The council elders sat in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from neutral to openly hostile. Adeora took her place at the head of the table, her back straight and her eyes calm, though her mind raced. "The trial of wisdom will assess your ability to lead with clarity, strategy, and foresight," Obinwachukwu announced, his deep voice resonating across the courtyard. "You will face 3 tasks, each designed to test a different aspect of leadership. Fail, and your claim to the throne ends here." Adeora nodded, her heart pounding. She had spent years studying under her father's tutelage, learning the intricacies of governance and strategy. Yet, this trial was different. The eyes of the kingdom were on her, and any misstep could spell disaster. The first task began with a problem of governance. A scroll was placed before Adeora, detailing a dispute between 2 villages over the ownership of a fertile stretch of land. The elders watched as she read the account, their expressions inscrutable. "The land in question has sustained both villages for generations," Obinwachukwu explained. "Yet, its resources are limited, and both sides claim it as their own. How would you resolve this conflict?" Adeora set the scroll down, her mind working quickly. "The land cannot belong to one village at the expense of the other," she began, her voice steady. "Both have depended on it for survival. My solution would be to establish shared stewardship, where the villages collaborate to manage its resources. The council could oversee this agreement to ensure fairness." There was a murmur of approval from some elders, though others remained silent. Obinwachukwu gave a slight nod. "A balanced solution. Let us proceed to the second task." The second task was more challenging. A large map of Al-Ahrar and its neighboring kingdoms was unrolled on the table. Small figurines representing armies, trade routes, and resources were placed strategically across the map. "You are faced with a threat from the Eastern Kingdom," another elder explained. "They demand tribute, threatening war if we refuse. At the same time, The Western Kingdom offers an alliance, but only if we commit to a trade deal that would weaken our merchants. How do you respond? Adorora leaned over the map, her fingers tracing the routes and symbols. She remembered her father's teachings: diplomacy first, strength second, and compromise only when necessary. After a moment, she spoke. The tribute to the Eastern Kingdom is a trap, she said. Paying it would only invite further demands and show weakness. Instead, I would send emissaries to the Eastern court with gifts, not a tribute, as a goodwill gesture. Meanwhile, I would use the alliance with the Western Kingdom strategically, negotiating terms that protect our merchants while strengthening our defenses. Her words hung in the air. One elder stroked his beard thoughtfully. A calculated approach, he said. But would you risk provoking the East? I would show them strength wrapped in diplomacy, Adorora replied. They must know we are willing to defend ourselves, but also that we prefer peace. The third and final task was the most personal. A young boy was brought forward, his small frame trembling as he stood before the council. The elder who accompanied him explained his story. The boy's father had been wrongfully imprisoned for stealing grain during a famine. Evidence later revealed his innocence, but the council had done nothing to overturn the sentence. Justice is the cornerstone of leadership, Obinwachukwu said. What would you do in this case, Adorora? Adorora looked at the boy, her chest tightening. The fear in his eyes reminded her of the countless villagers who depended on the throne for protection. The first step would be to release the boy's father and offer reparations for the injustice, she said. But that is not enough. We must reform the judicial process to prevent such mistakes in the future. Every citizen deserves a fair trial, regardless of their status. The boy's eyes widened with hope, and Adorora felt a spark of determination. This wasn't just a trial for the throne, it was a chance to prove what kind of leader she would be. As the tasks concluded, the courtyard fell silent. The elders conferred in hushed voices, their deliberations stretching on for what felt like hours. Finally, Obinwachukwu rose to speak. You have passed the trial of wisdom, he announced. Your solutions were thoughtful and just. However, the path to the throne is not yet complete. The third and final trial awaits. Adorora exhaled, a mixture of relief and resolve washing over her. She had proven herself once again, but she knew the hardest challenge was still to come. As she left the courtyard, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting for her to falter. In the shadows of the palace, Nkemdelim and Ikem met once more. The trader's face was alight with amusement as he spoke. She's clever, he admitted. But cleverness can be her undoing. Let her think she's winning. When the final trial begins, we'll ensure she doesn't walk away. Ikem frowned. And if she succeeds she won't, Nkemdelim replied, his voice cold. Not if we play our cards right. Unbeknownst to them, a pair of milky white eyes watched from the darkness. Ugochi, the seer, murmured a soft prayer. The battle for Al-Ra was far from over. The sun blazed high over Al-Ra as the kingdom gathered in the main square for the final trial. The crowd stretched as far as the eye could see, their voices a rumble of anticipation. Merchants abandoned their stalls, warriors stood in their finest armor, and elders whispered among themselves. This trial would determine whether Adorora would ascend the throne, or fall in disgrace. Adorora stood at the edge of the square, her heart steady despite the gravity of the moment. She wore her father's ceremonial cape, its weight a reminder of the legacy she carried. Around her, the council elders formed a semicircle, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Obinwachukwu stepped forward, his voice carrying over the crowd. The final trial is one of leadership and unity. The strength of Al-Ra lies not only in its warriors or its wisdom but also in the loyalty of its people. A true leader must inspire trust and bring the kingdom together. Adorora nodded, her mind racing. She had expected a direct challenge, perhaps a test of strategy or combat, but this trial was different. How could she prove her ability to unite a kingdom fractured by suspicion and ambition? The elders began by presenting a scenario. Two villages on the southern border have fallen into conflict, Obinwachukwu explained. Each claims the other has stolen their harvest, and tempers are escalating. If this is not resolved, it could lead to violence. Your task is to bring peace. Aurora stepped into the center of the square, her voice clear and unwavering as she addressed the crowd. Conflict weakens us, she began. A divided Ala-Ra cannot stand against the challenges we face. I will go to the villages myself and speak to their leaders. Together, we will find a solution. The crowd murmured in surprise. It was rare for a ruler, or even a candidate for the throne, to engage with common villagers directly. But Aurora knew this was her chance to show that her leadership was not confined to the palace walls. The journey to the southern border was treacherous, the air thick with tension. Aurora was accompanied by a small group of loyal warriors, their eyes scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. When they reached the first village, she was greeted with suspicion. The villagers, their faces worn with hardship, demanded answers. "Why should we trust you?" one man asked, his arms crossed. "You come from the palace, where you feast while we starve." Aurora met his gaze calmly. "I am here to listen," she said. "Tell me what happened." The villagers explained that their neighboring settlement had raided their storehouses, leaving them with barely enough food to survive. When Aurora visited the second village, she heard a similar story, each side blaming the other. It was a tangle of accusations and mistrust, but Aurora saw through it. The real problem was scarcity. She called a meeting between the leaders of both villages, bringing them together under the shade of an ancient baobab tree. "The land has not yielded enough for either of you," she said. "Fighting each other will only worsen your suffering. But if you work together, you can share resources and rebuild your storehouses." "And if they betray us?" one village leader asked, his voice laced with doubt. "They will not," Aurora replied firmly. "Because I will ensure that both villages receive equal support from the kingdom. You are not enemies, you are neighbors. And Ala-Ra cannot afford to lose its strength to infighting." Her words carried weight. For the first time, the leaders began to speak to each other, their hostility softening. By the end of the day, they had agreed to Aurora's proposal, and their bond renewed under her guidance. When Aurora returned to the palace, the square was packed with villagers eager to hear the outcome. Obinwachukwu stood at the forefront, his expression unreadable as she approached. "The conflict is resolved," Aurora announced, her voice ringing with pride. "The villages have agreed to work together, with the kingdom's support." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices a chorus of hope and unity. For the first time, Aurora felt the weight of their belief in her. She had not just passed the trial, she had proven that she could lead. Yet, in the shadows, danger loomed. Nkemdelim watched from a distance, his jaw clenched in frustration. "She's more resilient than I thought," he muttered to Ikem, who stood beside him. "She's won the people," Ikem admitted grudgingly. "But the throne is not hers yet." Nkemdelim's smile was cold and calculating. "Then it's time for her to face a challenge she cannot overcome." The next morning, the council prepared to formally declare Aurora as the ruler of Ala-Ra. The square was alive with celebration, drums beating in rhythm as villagers gathered to witness history. Aurora stood at the center, her heart swelling with pride as she awaited the final verdict. But before Obinwachukwu could speak, chaos erupted. A group of armed men stormed the square, their faces hidden behind masks. The crowd scattered in panic as the men moved with precision, their leader pointing directly at Aurora. "Seize her," he commanded. Aurora's warriors moved to intercept, but the attackers were well prepared. Swords clashed, and screams filled the air as the square descended into chaos. Aurora drew her father's sword, her movements swift and precise as she defended herself. Amid the turmoil, she caught sight of Nkemdelim, his smirk unmistakable even from a distance. Realization hit her like a blow. This was his doing. He had orchestrated the attack to eliminate her and seize the throne. But Ada was not easily defeated. Rallying her warriors, she fought back with unrelenting determination. The crowd began to regroup, their fear turning to anger as they saw her standing firm. Villagers joined the fight, their unity overwhelming the attackers. In the end, the square was silent once more, the ground littered with the defeated. Nkemdalim's men were captured, and the trader himself was dragged before the council. Ada stood tall, her face streaked with dirt but her spirit unbroken. "You sought to destroy me," she said, her voice cold. "But you have only strengthened my resolve. Allah will not fall to traitors." The council declared her the rightful ruler that day, and the people of Allah rejoiced. But Ada knew her journey was far from over. The throne was hers, but maintaining it would require every ounce of strength, wisdom, and unity she could muster. Watch out for part 2 as Ada was coronated as king. Please like and subscribe and also give us thumbs up.